It began as a hushed conversation behind Kensington Palace walls, one that aides tried to downplay and courtiers quickly silenced. But the look on Catherine, Princess of Wales's face as she exited that private meeting said everything the palace couldn't. Something was wrong, and it involved Charlotte. What was first dismissed as a rumor soon turned into a royal firestorm, now confirmed by the very people who fought to protect it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What makes this moment so unsettling is not just the secrecy but the precision of it. A private, highly restricted meeting had been called involving Catherine, William, Prince of Wales, and a carefully selected circle of senior royal medical advisors. Access was tightly controlled. Records, according to insiders, were either minimized or deliberately kept vague. And within those walls, something shifted, something that would ripple far beyond a single conversation. Reports began surfacing almost immediately afterward, hinting at a sudden and unexpected development concerning Princess Charlotte. But this was not the kind of concern that leaks easily. Palace aides were swiftly instructed to remain silent under strict internal directives, a move so unusual that it raised more questions than it answered. Silence, in the royal world, is often louder than any statement, and this silence felt deliberate, almost protective, as though shielding something far more significant than a routine matter. Catherine's exit from that meeting only deepened the unease. She was pale, visibly shaken. For someone known for her composure, for her unwavering control even under intense scrutiny, this was not just noticeable, it was alarming. Those who witnessed it could not ignore the shift. It was not just concern. It was something heavier, something that suggested she had just been entrusted with information she could neither ignore nor escape. And then came the moment that quietly confirmed the tension. Later that evening, William was seen with Charlotte, close, protective, and unusually present. It was not a public display, it was subtle. But in royal circles, subtlety speaks volumes. The image of a father offering quiet reassurance hinted at a reality unfolding behind closed doors, one that blurred the line between personal crisis and institutional consequence. Media insiders would later claim that the signs had been there for weeks. Small inconsistencies, slight changes in tone, unexplained absences. At the time, they were dismissed as routine fluctuations. But now, looking back, those fragments began to form a pattern, one that pointed toward something carefully managed, carefully hidden, and now, slowly coming into focus. And as the whispers grew louder, one truth became impossible to ignore. This was never just about a private concern. It was never just about a family moment shielded from the public eye. Because beneath the surface, beneath the silence and the controlled appearances, something far more profound was beginning to emerge, something tied not just to the present, but to a legacy that had been quietly waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. But the chilling truth wasn't just about Charlotte's health, it was tied to a royal legacy that had long been buried, until now. Long before the whispers reached the public, there were already signs that Queen Elizabeth II had quietly set something in motion, something so deliberate, so calculated, that even those closest to her failed to grasp its full meaning until now. What makes this revelation so powerful is not the noise surrounding it today, but the silence that protected it for so long. Because in the final years of her reign, when the world believed continuity was already secured, subtle shifts began taking place behind closed door, shifts that were never meant to be seen in real time, only understood in hindsight. Reports suggest that the Queen had started revisiting long-standing ideas about succession, not in the sense of rewriting laws, but in redefining what true readiness looked like in a rapidly changing world. These were not public debates or ceremonial discussions. They were private consultations, carefully managed, often involving only the most trusted advisors, conversations that carried weight. Conversations that asked difficult questions about the future, not just who would inherit the crown, but who could carry its burden without breaking under it. Palace insiders whisper that her thinking evolved beyond the rigid expectations of bloodline alone. Stability, she believed, required more than tradition. It demanded temperament, discipline, an unshakable sense of duty. And it is within this quiet recalibration that Catherine, Princess of Wales, reportedly began to stand out, not suddenly, not dramatically, but consistently. While others moved within the system, Catherine appeared to embody it. Her composure never faltered. Her respect for protocol never wavered, and her public image, carefully maintained over years of scrutiny, reflected something deeper than performance set, reflected alignment with the institution itself. Those observing closely began to notice that her presence carried a different kind of weight, one that extended beyond expectation and into something that felt almost inevitable. It is believed that certain correspondences from that period sealed, protected, and possibly stored within the royal red box contain language that has only now begun to be interpreted in a new light, not explicit declarations, not direct instructions, but carefully chosen words that suggest preference, foresight, and perhaps even quiet preparation. Various interpretations of these documents indicate that the Queen may have been thinking beyond immediate succession structures, focusing instead on long-term continuity, on who would safeguard the monarchy's identity when it faced its most uncertain future. And in those interpretations, Catherine's name appears not as an anomaly, but as a natural conclusion. What makes this so compelling is that nothing was ever publicly confirmed. There were no announcements, no deviations from established order, and yet the consistency of these quiet signals has become impossible to ignore. The Queen, known for her precision and restraint, did not act impulsively. Every decision was measured, every move calculated. Which raises a question that now feels unavoidable: if Catherine's role was being shaped in this way behind the scenes, then the events unfolding today are not unexpected disruptions. They are the continuation of something that was set in motion long ago, a contingency not born out of crisis, but out of careful anticipation. And suddenly, the pieces begin to align. The secrecy surrounding recent developments, the intensity of internal reactions, the subtle but undeniable shift in roles and expectations. None of it feels accidental anymore. Instead, it feels like activation, the moment when a long-prepared plan begins to reveal itself. Not all at once, but in fragments that slowly form a complete picture. A picture that suggests the future of the monarchy may have been guided far more deliberately than anyone realized. But if this was always part of a larger plan, why was it hidden so carefully, and who stood to lose the most if it came to light? As the implications of the Queen's quiet decisions began to surface, the atmosphere inside the palace shifted, subtle at first, then unmistakably tense, as alliances quietly hardened and old rivalries reignited. What had once been a carefully balanced system began to feel fragile, as though a single revelation had unsettled years of silent agreement. The change was not announced. It was sensed. Conversations grew shorter. Meetings became more selective. And behind the polished exterior of continuity, something far more volatile was beginning to take shape, because the idea of Catherine, Princess of Wales, emerging as a central stabilizing force was not universally embraced. For some, it represented reassurance. For others, it signaled disruption, an unexpected shift that challenged the quiet assumptions that had long governed the internal structure of the monarchy. Sources close to palace operations suggest that certain figures, particularly those aligned with deeply traditional hierarchies, viewed even the symbolic elevation of Catherine as a potential fracture point, not because it broke any formal rule, but because it altered something far more sensitive: the unspoken balance of influence. In an institution where perception carries as much weight as protocol, even a subtle change can ripple outward with unpredictable force. And as whispers surrounding Catherine's growing importance began to circulate, so too did a sense of unease among those who felt that the old order was being quietly rewritten without their consent. Among the most closely watched reactions was that of Camilla, Queen Consort. Reports suggest she maintained a measured, almost calculated distance from the unfolding developments, neither openly opposing nor fully embracing the shift. But distance, in this context, did not mean indifference. It meant observation. It meant waiting. Because within the palace, restraint often masks strategy, and silence can be its own form of response. Others within the senior ranks appeared equally cautious, monitoring each development with growing concern, aware that whatever was unfolding carried implications that extended far beyond a single individual's role. At the same time, internal meetings began to increase, not in scale, but in intensity. Smaller groups, more controlled access, conversations that excluded broader staff and focused only on those deemed essential. This narrowing of communication channels signaled something significant. Decisions were being discussed that required absolute discretion, the kind of decisions that do not just respond to events, but reshape the path ahead. And within those discussions, the situation surrounding Princess Charlotte became increasingly intertwined with the larger narrative. What initially appeared to be a deeply personal matter now seemed to carry institutional weight, raising questions that no one had expected to confront so soon. Was Charlotte's situation simply coincidental, or had it accelerated conversations that were already quietly underway? That question began to linger, unspoken but ever-present, as insiders attempted to piece together the timing of events. Because in a system built on precision, timing is rarely accidental, and the convergence of personal concern and structural shift created a tension that could no longer be contained within private discussions alone. What once felt like a contained family matter was now evolving into something far more complex, a recalibration of influence that touched every corner of the monarchy. It was subtle, almost invisible to the outside world, but within those walls, it was undeniable. The balance was shifting, the roles were adjusting, and the future, once assumed to be predictable, now carried an undercurrent of uncertainty that no one could ignore. But tension alone doesn't rewrite history. Something had to trigger the shift from quiet concern to undeniable confirmation. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a ceremony. It was a discovery, quiet, almost accidental, that suddenly made sense of everything and confirmed what many had only dared to suspect. For weeks, perhaps longer, there had been tension building beneath the surface, an unspoken awareness that something significant was unfolding just out of reach. And then, without warning, a single piece of information shifted everything. Insiders suggest that during what appeared to be a routine internal review, one of many conducted following the final administrative arrangements of Queen Elizabeth II, a document surfaced that had not previously been given the attention it now demanded. It was not marked as extraordinary. It did not arrive with urgency, but its contents carried a weight that could no longer be ignored. Those familiar with the process described the moment not as dramatic, but as deeply unsettling, because what was uncovered did not introduce something entirely new. It clarified something that had already been quietly taking shape. The language within the document, reportedly subtle and carefully constructed, pointed toward a broader interpretation of royal roles than had traditionally been acknowledged. It did not challenge succession law. It did not disrupt established order, but it expanded the framework in a way that redefined influence. And at the center of that reinterpretation stood Catherine, Princess of Wales. According to various interpretations, the document suggested that Catherine's role extended beyond the expectations of a future queen consort. It positioned her quietly but unmistakably as a guardian of continuity, someone whose influence would operate not through formal authority, but through sustained presence, trust, and alignment with the monarchy's deeper purpose. This was not a title. It was something more complex, a recognition of function over form, and for those reviewing the document, the implication was immediate. This was not incidental language, it was intentional. Analysts who have examined similar royal protocols point to the precision often embedded in such phrasing. Every word is chosen carefully, every implication weighed, and within that structure, even the smallest deviation can signal a larger shift. In this case, the phrasing reportedly allowed for expanded influence without requiring any formal alteration to succession law, subtle but powerful distinction. It meant that nothing needed to change publicly for everything to change internally, and that realization carried consequences that extended far beyond the document itself. What intensified the impact of this discovery was its timing. It emerged at a moment when concerns surrounding Princess Charlotte were already drawing attention inward, focusing the palace on matters that blended the personal with the institutional. The overlap was impossible to ignore. What might have been dismissed as coincidence instead began to feel like convergence too, separate threads aligning at precisely the moment they could no longer remain separate. Senior advisors are believed to have recognized the significance almost immediately, not because the document demanded action, but because it demanded understanding. A series of private consultations reportedly followed, carefully controlled and deliberately contained, aimed at interpreting the implications without triggering unnecessary disruption. The goal was not to announce, but to manage, to ensure that what had been uncovered did not spiral beyond the institution's ability to absorb it. And yet, even within those controlled discussions, The shift was undeniable. What had once existed as speculation, quiet, unconfirmed, and easily dismissed, was now being treated with a different level of seriousness. Not publicly, not officially, but internally, the tone had changed, the conversations had deepened. And the possibility that Catherine's role had been quietly defined long before this moment began to take on the weight of something far closer to certainty than anyone had expected. But confirmation brings consequences, and not everyone was prepared to accept what it meant. When the truth began to circulate within the highest levels of the royal household, the reaction was swift, controlled, and yet impossible to fully contain. What had once been confined to quiet consultations and carefully guarded documents was now moving through the palace with a different kind of energy, measured, deliberate, but undeniably real. And as that truth settled into the awareness of those who understood its weight, a subtle fracture began to appear. Not loud, not visible to the outside world, but unmistakable to those within. Because this was not just information, it was a shift, a recalibration of influence that forced every key figure to confront what it meant for their place within the institution. Reports indicate that a quiet division began to take shape almost immediately. On one side were those who viewed the development as a necessary evolution, a recognition that the monarchy, in order to endure, had to adapt without breaking. For them, the emergence of Catherine, Princess of Wales, as a central stabilizing force was not a disruption, but a solution, a continuation of the very principles that had sustained the institution through decades of change. But on the other side were those who saw it differently. To them, this was not evolution, it was a quiet upheaval, a shift that challenged long-standing assumptions about hierarchy, influence, and the unspoken rules that governed the inner workings of royal life. And in that contrast, tension found new ground to grow. As this internal divide deepened, the changes began to surface in ways that could not be easily dismissed. Catherine's public appearances, once defined by consistency, now carried a new kind of weight, not overt, not formally declared, but present. There was a shift in tone, in positioning, in the subtle signals that those familiar with royal protocol know how to read. She was no longer simply fulfilling expectations, she was shaping them. And while the public may not have fully understood the reason, the effect was impossible to ignore. Something had changed, and that change felt deliberate. At the same time, William, Prince of Wales, appeared increasingly resolute. His stance, though never explicitly stated, became clearer with each passing moment. There was a firmness to it, a quiet reinforcement that suggested alignment not just with Catherine, but with the direction this shift represented. For those observing closely, it became evident that this was not a development being tolerated, it was one being supported. And that support carried significance, because it indicated that the future of leadership was not resisting the change, but embracing it. Meanwhile, palace communications grew more precise. Statements became shorter, language became more controlled. There was a noticeable effort to avoid direct acknowledgement of what was unfolding, while at the same time reinforcing Catherine's centrality through subtle emphasis. It was a careful balance, maintaining the appearance of continuity, while allowing the reality of change to take hold beneath the surface. This was not denial, it was management, a strategy designed to absorb the shift without allowing it to disrupt the broader perception of stability. And yet, even with that control, the shift could not be completely hidden. The public, though largely unaware of the internal dynamics, began to sense a difference. It was not something that could be easily explained. It was a feeling, a change in tone, a growing awareness that the monarchy was moving, quietly but unmistakably, toward something new. Conversations began to reflect it, observations became more focused, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the narrative surrounding Catherine began to evolve in a way that mirrored what had already been accepted within the palace walls. But beneath the surface of controlled reactions, one question remained: was this the beginning of a new era, or the unraveling of an old one? Without a formal announcement, without a crown or decree, Catherine, Princess of Wales, began stepping into a role that felt both inevitable and unprecedented. There was no single moment that defined the transition, no clear line that separated what she had been from what she was becoming. Instead, it unfolded gradually, quietly, almost imperceptibly, until the shift was no longer something to be interpreted, but something to be recognized. Because what made this evolution so powerful was not its visibility, but its consistency. It did not demand attention. It earned it. And as the weight of recent revelations continued to settle across the institution, Catherine's presence began to carry a new kind of meaning, one that extended beyond expectation and into quiet authority. Observers who had followed her journey closely began to notice subtle changes in the nature of her engagements. There was a shift in focus, a deliberate alignment with areas tied not just to representation, but to identity, stability, and long-term continuity. These were not casual appearances. They were carefully chosen moments that reflected something deeper, a growing role in shaping the narrative of the monarchy itself. And while the structure of her duties remained outwardly familiar, the intent behind them felt different, more deliberate, more central, as though each step was part of a broader path that had been quietly laid out long before it was ever understood. What remained unchanged, however, was her demeanor, calm, composed, unwavering. In a time when uncertainty seemed to ripple through even the most established systems, Catherine's consistency became a form of reassurance. She did not react to the tension. She absorbed it. She did not seek to redefine the institution. She reflected it. And in doing so, she created a contrast that became increasingly difficult to ignore, the contrast between visible pressure and silent strength. It was this balance that began to define her evolving role, not through declaration, but through presence. Reports suggest that behind the scenes, her involvement had begun to extend beyond the boundaries traditionally associated with her position. Consultations, discussions, moments where her perspective was sought not as a courtesy, but as a contribution. These were not publicized. They were not confirmed. But within the inner workings of the palace, such shifts rarely go unnoticed. They signal trust. They signal alignment. And perhaps most importantly, they signal preparation. Because influence within the monarchy is rarely granted suddenly, it is built, layer by layer, until it becomes an integral part of the system itself. As this pattern continued, the narrative surrounding Catherine began to evolve in parallel. Internally, she was increasingly viewed as a stabilizing force, a figure capable of bridging the gap between tradition and adaptation without compromising either. Publicly, that perception began to take shape more subtly, reflected in tone, in coverage, in the way her role was framed without ever being explicitly redefined. It was a transformation that operated on two levels at once, visible enough to be felt, but controlled enough to avoid disruption. And within that balance, a new understanding began to emerge. This was not a sudden elevation. It was a culmination. The fulfillment of something that had been in motion long before the current moment brought it into focus. A path shaped by quiet decisions, careful observation, and a vision that extended beyond immediate necessity. And as Catherine continued to move within that path, the question that had once seemed distant now felt immediate, pressing, impossible to ignore. But if Catherine's rise was always part of the plan, then the final question becomes impossible to ignore. In the end, this wasn't just about Catherine, Princess of Wales, or Princess Charlotte, or even the present moment. It was about the legacy of a queen who understood that the future of the crown would depend on choices made in silence. Because long after Queen Elizabeth II was gone, her influence never truly faded. It lingered. It endured. Not through grand speeches or public declarations, but through decisions so carefully constructed that their full meaning would only be understood when the time was right. And that time, it seems, is now. What we are witnessing is not the beginning of a story, but the unveiling of one that has been quietly unfolding for years, layer by layer, decision by decision, guided by a vision that refused to leave the future to uncertainty. There is something profoundly unsettling about realizing that what feels sudden is, in fact, the result of long-term design. That the shifts we are only now beginning to recognize were anticipated, prepared for, and embedded within the very structure of the institution itself. The Queen, known for her restraint and precision, did not rely on chance. Every action carried intention, every silence carried meaning. And within those silences, a framework was built, one that would allow the monarchy to adapt without ever appearing to abandon its core identity. Catherine's emergence as a central figure does not break from that framework. It fulfills it. It reflects a continuation of a strategy that prioritized endurance over immediate clarity, stability over visibility, and long-term survival over short-term perception. What makes this moment so powerful is the way it reframes everything that came before it. The events surrounding Charlotte, once seen as isolated and deeply personal, now take on a different significance. They become a catalyst, a moment that accelerated the unveiling of dynamics that had long existed beneath the surface. It is as though the pressure of circumstance forced the institution to reveal what it had been quietly preparing all along, and in doing so, it exposed not weakness, but depth, not confusion, but design. Because when those hidden layers begin to align with visible reality, the result is not chaos, it is clarity. A clarity that can feel overwhelming precisely because it was never meant to be understood all at once. As the monarchy moves forward from this point, it does so with a renewed sense of purpose, even if that purpose is not openly declared. The narrative is shifting not dramatically, not disruptively, but with a quiet confidence that suggests control rather than reaction. This moment, which may have once been interpreted as a potential crisis, now reveals itself as something else entirely. A turning point, a moment where the depth of planning behind the institution's survival becomes impossible to ignore. Because survival in this context is not accidental. It is engineered, carefully, patiently, and often invisibly. And perhaps that is the most powerful realization of all. That behind every visible change lies a series of invisible decisions, made long before the world was ready to understand them. Decisions that do not seek recognition, but results. Decisions that shape the future not through force, but through inevitability. Catherine's role, as it continues to evolve, stands as a reflection of that philosophy, a symbol not of disruption, but of continuity carried forward in a new form. A form that honors the past while quietly preparing for what lies ahead. Because in the quiet corridors of power, where history is written long before it is revealed, the crown's future was never left to chance, it was chosen. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.